1. Good evening, happy Saturday to everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Michael Ween. Joining me this evening over the phone as he is driving back to Austin, Texas, I believe, is Mr. Emmy Nixon. We are back for the 4th edition in our 2024 NFL team previews, where we will be covering 3 teams next in our Power Rankings countdown. If you're joining us live, we greatly appreciate it, especially taking time out of your Saturday night. But if not, and you're viewing this later, make sure that if you're not already subscribed to our channel, that you do so. We greatly appreciate that. And you like our videos, it helps the algorithm and so forth. We're excited to be here tonight, continuing and starting to get into like the real beef of our NFL team previews, as we're now jumping another tier after our first team tonight, as we'll explain here in a minute. We've already done 3 of these episodes. Go check them out. We've done 20 and 19, 18 and 17, and then just earlier this week we did 16 and 15 with the Dolphins and the Steelers, and that was a pretty animated episode. So with all that being said, let me welcome in from the car, I believe, my fantastic co-host, Mr. Emmy Nixon. What's up?
Doing well, man. As you said, I'm heading back to Austin right now, but the NFL season is coming up soon, and we got a tight schedule to adhere to if we're gonna get all these episodes in, and I'm excited to get it going.
Yeah, very excited to have you. Real quick, before we get into the football, I guess each of us 2-minute summation of today's gold medal game between the USA and France. What were your main takeaways?
Oh my gosh, man. First of all, this Olympic tournament, I think, really showcased the best of basketball. USA Serbia game, this game, like I really think like basketball is in such a great place right now worldwide. But in terms of the game itself, I liked the changes that were made to the lineup. I liked including Jason Tatum a little bit more. I thought he brought size as like a weak side defender and length as well. And I also think with Tatum in the game, you have a clear size and strength advantage against just about every team. With LeBron out there as well, Anthony Edwards, and all the other strong players you have out there.
Yeah, for me, I had a lot of the same takeaways, but here's what I'll say. It was basically a win-win-win game for me. Let me explain. The first win being that the USA took care of business and they won gold, as they should have, right?
Yep.
And there were some down moments. There were moments where they were behind, not necessarily in this game today, but we know what happened in the semifinal against Serbia. But they ended up taking care of business. They got their gold medal. And Steph Curry, LeBron James, and Kevin Durant, over the past 2 games, mainly Steph Curry, who goes 17 of 26 from 3 in the semifinal and the gold medal game championship. Unbelievable. Captain America kind of stuff from Steph Curry. But obviously LeBron was really consistent and KD was fantastic, the all-time leading scorer for the USA in the Olympics. So that's number one. Number two, France put up an admirable performance. Like, this was a competitive game throughout. I never thought that they were going to win the game, but I mean, Wemby and co. stayed close. They made it competitive towards the end, and that's what you like to see. And Wemby had a good performance. I liked how Wemby played. He was pretty efficient. I think he finished with 26 points on pretty efficient shooting. Still 20 years old. He's not even going to turn 21 until January, which is just fantastic. And then I like some of the post-game stuff. Tyrese Halliburton had a tweet about 45 minutes ago, which I think if you're a Pacers fan, you got to get really excited about because he really showed some real nice self-awareness. He posted a picture of himself with the gold medal, holding up the gold medal. But his commentary was, you ain't do nothing on the group project and still get an A. Which I thought was fantastic. And then Wemby had a quote after the game in an interview where he said, I'm learning and I'm worried for the opponents in a couple of years. And the reporter then followed up by asking, in FIBA or the NBA? And Wemby said everywhere, which I really like. So win-win-win. Really good basketball game for me today. And I've also been watching some of the preseason football that we've had. We got our first look at Jaden Daniels. We got our first look at Caleb Williams. Got my first look at J.J. McCarthy this afternoon. And so it's been a fun day.
Definitely.
All right. What were you
I
gonna say?
didn't get to watch much of the football, but let's get into this thing.
Yeah. So we're starting off our episode today with team number 14, which is going to be the Cleveland Browns. But before we get into that, let me just really fast say that this is going to conclude our first tier of power rankings.
Right.
We had, I believe it's 6 teams in our fringe playoff contender tier, which is going to conclude with the Browns. And then we're going to jump to our next tier, which we'll explain. But it's gone from Indianapolis to Chicago to Jacksonville to Atlanta to Miami to Pittsburgh and now Cleveland. So, Emmy, for the last team of this tier, really fast in 1 or 2 minutes, how would you summarize the Browns in 2023, last year?
Chaotic yet potent when they on those games where they were able to figure it out and put it all together. They were impressive, but outside of those games, it just really just felt like a team that didn't really reach their full potential, and we'll get into that, I'm sure, as we move along here.
So my 2 minutes on this, they were 11-6 in 2023. They finished second in a very tough AFC North, which had 3 teams make the playoffs last year. But they did lose in the wild card round with, of course, a resurgent Joe Flacco playing quarterback. The Browns in 2023 were a really good football team, characterized by 2 things, in my opinion. Number one was possibly, and we talked about this a ton last year, the best defense in football. If not a top 3 defense, for sure. They were number 1 in total defense. They were number 1 in pass defense. That secondary was really strong last year. And they were 6th in sacks. And so it was a really strong defense. And even when they weren't great offensively, they still were in games and could win games because of their defense. And then number 2, the not so great part, as the defense was great, was the instability at quarterback. And let me just recap that for you guys in case you don't remember clearly. If you count in-game changes that were made due to injury or just bad play, so a quarterback getting benched, in addition to the changes that they had to make week to week, the Browns changed quarterbacks 11 times last year after beginning the season with Deshaun Watson. In weeks 1 through 3, it was Deshaun Watson. He injured his right shoulder in week 3 and was out the next few games. So then they had to play Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Dorian Thompson-Robinson struggles in week 4. So after their bye week, they go with PJ Walker in week 6. And the list goes on and on and on. They went from PJ Walker back to Deshaun Watson. They ended up with Joe Flacco playing quarterback at the very end, Jeff Driscoll playing in week 18. Just a lot of instability at the quarterback. But despite all that, they were still able to go 11-6 and make the playoffs because of how good this roster is. And so, with all that being said, if you don't have anything else you want to add to that, let's start off by summarizing their offseason. What were your favorite additions that the Browns made this offseason?
This offseason, I think the Browns, they couldn't really, spend heavy with how the Deshaun Watson's contract is set up. But
Right.
they did add
Jerry Jeudy.
Jerry Jeudy, right. They did trade for Jerry Jeudy to add to the receiving core. That's probably the first I'll mention on my list.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't have my list in front of me since I'm driving, but first I would definitely say Jerry Jeudy, and then I would refer over to you. What did you think?
Well, I have my 3 right here in front of me, so I'll go ahead and give you them and see if you have anything else to add to it. Since you are driving, I understand that. I think re-signing it, this is in no particular order, but I think re-signing Zadarius Smith, 2 years, $23.5 million, very affordable contract, about 11 or a little over 11 million per year, I think it is. I think he played well enough in his first stint with the Browns, with 5.5 sacks, but generating constant pressure with 20 quarterback hits. Even though he's on the older side, I liked re-signing him to a short-term extension. Pretty productive in generating consistent pressure last year. I like that they re-signed him. That's number 1. Number 2, and they didn't have a first-round pick. I think they get their first-round pick back this year, which will be good for them. But Michael Hall Jr., their second-round pick out of Ohio State, he's an interior defensive lineman. He actually makes my list for one of my favorite additions for the Browns. I think this pick blends need, value, and upside. He was one of 2 Power 5 interior pass rushers last year at Ohio, or in Power 5, to generate a pressure rate of 10% or higher in each of the last 2 seasons. So he's one of 2 players to do that. And the other guy was Johnny Newton out of Illinois, who was also a pretty high draft pick. So I think he gives you some upside, some value in the second round, and his production in college kind of speaks for itself. And then my last guy on my list, again in no particular order, was Jerry Jeudy. It's been an up and down career so far for Jerry Jeudy in Denver. I think it's only 11 receiving touchdowns in 4 years. But if you're the Browns, you needed help in the receiver room. You needed a number 2 or at the very least a solid number 3 option. And you get that in Jeudy without having to give up major draft capital. It was a 5th and a 6th round pick. Now, they did sign him to a pretty hefty 3-year extension, but I think his game, just in general, complements Amari Cooper's game pretty damn well. And so I think he'll have some more success in Cleveland, given there's more around him, and hopefully the quarterback play is good enough to elevate his game. But he would definitely make my list of offseason additions. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Definitely, yeah. So Michael Hall Jr., I thought was a really good pick as well. His story is very interesting. He struggled in college as a run defender, because in college, Ohio State has their interior linemen. They want them to be kind of more speed driven and less like more so just shooting gaps. But as soon as he left Ohio State, he immediately gained 15 pounds and got up to 295. So the thought is, if that helps him improve his run defense, you're looking at a guy who may have been a first round pick and getting him in the mid second round. So really good value there. And I think you covered everything on Zadarius Smith. He's a fantastic guy to have opposite Myles Garrett, obviously. So, yeah, that's about it.
Okay. Now we go into our X factors for the Browns to have success this season one way or the other. And these can be coaches, they can be part of the staff, they can be players, new acquisitions, position groups, whatever you want it to be, scheme, fits, that will make could make a difference for the Browns one way or the other in 2024. So I'll let you start us off with an X factor or two for Cleveland this year in your mind.
To me, it's the run defense. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they were bottom 10 in run defense. I know that for a fact. And last year, in terms of their overall defense, their secondary was fantastic. But when you're giving up, 2nd and 4, 2nd and 2, you put yourself in a position where teams can hit you with play action, and you're putting your secondary in a really tough spot at that point where the offense is in an advantageous position. So I think getting to more 3rd and longs where you can have your strength, your team, your pass rush pin their ears back definitely is a priority, and I think that will raise the overall profile of this defense up to where the teams like the Jets and the true elite groups are.
I would agree with that. A couple X factors I would add for the Browns, just right off the top of my head. Number one, I think the offensive tackle room in general is an X factor. I think when we talk about the Browns' offensive line as a whole, it remains a total asset in the run game. And I still think it's a top 5-ish offensive line in football when it's healthy. But I do think that the tackles in particular, and injuries play a part in this, which I'll mention in a second, need to improve in pass protection to help the quarterback situation. Jedrick Wills comes to mind as someone who's going to be really important at the left tackle spot for them this year if he's healthy. That's number one. But number two, he allowed a 9.5% pressure rate last year, which ranked 33rd out of 35 qualifying offensive tackles. So I think that needs to get better. And then you look at these other two guys, Dawan Jones, who's a younger guy, and Jack Conklin, who I think are ready for training camp, but they all suffered knee injuries at various points last year. And so, number one, those guys need to be healthy. And number two, I think pass protection from the tackle standpoint needs to improve a little bit to help out Deshaun Watson. And then an underrated X factor I actually came up with, and an overlooked one at that, because I think a lot of people forgot that Mike Vrabel didn't end up actually getting another head coaching job. He was hired as a coaching/personnel consultant for the Cleveland Browns. I think that's actually a very underrated kind of weapon for the Browns that they can use, because he's going to bring a wealth of expertise to the coaching staff on offense and defense, especially on special teams. He's just going to help them. He's going to help Kevin Stefanski out with in-game adjustments, coaching, game prep. To have an experienced head coach who's accomplished the things that Mike Vrabel has, I think it's huge. How much of an impact is it going to make on Sundays? I don't know that we'll actually be able to see it as fans, but I do think it could make an intangible impact on the Browns team as a whole. It's not often you get to hire head coaches with 5+ years of experience as just secondary consultants on your coaching staff. I think Mike Vrabel could be an underrated part in that.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
And then my last one was, I mean, of course, the quarterback position is huge.
Right.
But my last one is going to be actually kind of that slot receiver position. We know about Amari Cooper. We know, he's had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, 1,250 yards last year. He's the only receiver in Browns history to record back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. We know about David Njoku, the season he had last year, catching 81 passes for almost 900 yards and 6 scores, all career highs for him. Hopefully that can continue. But I think the questions for this team, number one, come from kind of the battle at that slot position between Elijah Moore and just kind of the battle in general between Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, and Cedric Tillman. Who's kind of going to be the odd man out? Because I think they're expecting Cedric Tillman to take another step after what he showed last year. So if it's Jerry Jeudy, who played a lot in the slot last year, battling with Elijah Moore, that could be an important part of this offense.
Right.
And then, of course, another X factor would be the health of Nick Chubb, who looks good after that horrific knee injury that he suffered early last year, which, of course, hurt the Browns in some respects. When he comes back, how much does that factor in? How does he look?
For sure. Yeah. If anyone's going to be able to come back from something like that, it's probably Nick Chubb, given that he actually has already done it. The injury he had at Georgia, I'm sure y'all have heard before, is a very similar type of injury. So we'll see what happens. He's obviously much older than he was at Georgia, but I'm optimistic.
Okay, so the over-under for the Browns this upcoming season is the same as the AFC North team that we talked about last episode, the Pittsburgh Steelers, at 8.5. Last year, they well exceeded that at 11-6. But this year, 8.5 over or under for Cleveland. What are your thoughts on that?
It's really tough because the AFC got better, and we still we're 3 years into Deshaun Watson as a Cleveland Brown, 2 or 3 years. I can't quite remember which, but either way, it just feels like we still don't know what the heck he is. And it's almost like you're talking about a young quarterback, but we're not. He's a veteran at this point, and we still don't know if he's ever going to get back to that form he had when he was with Houston. And that to me is really going to be the main deciding factor. We know this defense is fantastic. This run game with Kevin Stefanski designing it is fantastic as well. So it's really just on Deshaun Watson and I guess just the quarterback play as a whole. So I am going to say the over, but I think it'll be, if I were to predict what their season will be, I'm going to say 9 or 10 wins and miss the playoffs by a game.
I'm right in that same ballpark. I think 9 or 10 wins is very realistic because this is, I mean, when it's all said and done, this still is one of the best top to bottom rosters in the league. I think, if they can just get quality play out of Deshaun Watson, which we will see if that can happen, they're poised to be one of the better teams, not only in this division, but potentially in the AFC. I think their defense is still going to be far and away the kind of catalyst for them. I still really like their defense. I think their front seven is fantastic. They added some depth to the linebacker position, signing, I think it's Jordan Hicks to a contract. I like what they have there, along with you know, Jeremiah Arusu what's his name? I always
Yeah,
forget.
just call him JOK. I think it's Owusu
JOK.
Karamoa.
Yeah,
Koromoa.
Owusu
Yeah.
Karamoa, JOK. Um, I think their defense, along Myles Garrett's a perennial defensive player of the year candidate. I'll take 9 or 10 wins, and they're kind of what Pittsburgh is, but with a better roster. I think slightly, um, because of their offensive line and a couple other areas on the team. They're just not. They're kind of more unpredictable than what you're going to get from the Steelers because of a lot of different things. So the Browns and the quarterback position has just been so volatile the past couple of
Right.
years. But either way, I think those two games against Pittsburgh could kind of decide which team finishes better and which team finishes worse. But I do think it's very realistic. I don't know if it happens that all four teams in a couple divisions finish with winning records this year. Whether or not they'll be in the playoffs or not is a different story. But especially in the AFC North, I think that's a possibility. Let's move on to our next team. Are you ready to do so?
Yep. Ready. Let's get it.
Okay. So now we're in a new tier, ladies and gentlemen. We finished our fringe playoff contender tier finally. And now we're into the next tier. We call these teams the wide range of outcome teams. And this tier is going to be 5 teams, 2 of which we're going to cover right now. And then the next 2 will be covering, maybe the next 3 will be covering like middle of this week. So our next team is the Seattle Seahawks. So 1 or 2 minutes, Emmy. 2023 recap for Seattle.
Well, I think last year Seattle, I would describe it as a transition season. Things didn't really click the same offensively in year 2 with Geno Smith at QB, and that was for a variety of different reasons. They had some regression at tackle in year 2 from their 2 rookies. Um, some of that was to do with injuries, but it regardless still affected their team and resulted in some pass protection issues. Um, and as a whole, their defense was not what we expected as well. Looking at their defensive talent and what they actually were last year, you saw 2 different things.
Right.
So I think last year they looked like a team that maybe didn't fully realize their potential. And I said that as well with the Browns too, but this team was even more so.
Yeah, I would agree. I would 100% agree. Um, I talk a lot of Seahawks football because I have a cousin who is a huge Seahawks fan. So we've had him on the show before. But I generally agree with that. And I think to add on to that, I just say the past couple years, the Seahawks, I don't mean to be like Colin Cowherd like here, even though I definitely respect him. They've kind of been like ordering a ham sandwich. It's not your first choice, like of what you want when you're hungry, but it's a pretty reliable, safe snack or meal
Yeah,
when you're hungry because you know what you're getting. It's hard to screw up a ham sandwich. It's not elite. It's not great. I mean, I don't know anybody who likes ham sandwiches as their favorite food. But
yeah,
you kind of know what I mean. Like the
yeah,
Seahawks,
yeah, yeah.
they're just kind of like that. Like you know what you're gonna get. Um, it it's not it's frustrating sometimes, and it can be really good sometimes. Because the past 3 years, they're kind of just that. They're 1 game below 500 in the past 3 seasons, 25 and 26. And they're 2 games below 500 against the spread the past 3 years, 24 and 26 and 1. So it's basically like flip a coin with Seattle the past couple years. Will they win? Flip a coin. They're 9-8 each of the past 2 years. And will they cover the spread? It's kind of flip a coin. They might look great. They might not look that good. I
Yeah,
know
and
that
it feels
sounds
like they're allergic to blowing teams out as well.
right. They played a lot of close games last year, but we'll get to that in a little bit. That's basically what it was. I think Gino took a little bit of a step back from where he was in 2022, 2 years ago, when they did in fact make the playoffs. But it wasn't all of his fault, not at all.
Yeah.
The offensive line, especially the injuries to the two young tackles, did not help whatsoever. And there were some other factors that played into that, but he was still good. I mean, he was still
Yeah.
good. Geno Smith just wasn't.
He,
He dropped off a little bit from 2022.
right. And he's asked to do a lot in that offense that he was in, Shane Waldron's offense.
Right.
He's really asked to make superhuman type of throws. And for him to have the numbers he has, I think is impressive.
Okay. Let's get into the offseason for Seattle. You want me to go first on my offseason acquisitions, or do you want to start us off?
I'll go first. I remember more stuff with the Seahawks.
Okay.
Their offseason was more memorable, in my opinion.
Okay, go ahead.
I loved the Seahawks offseason. And here's the thing. You'll see a lot of different podcasts have the Seahawks in the 17 to 20 range in their rankings. We have them down here at 13, mostly because I loved what they did this offseason. The first and foremost, I have to mention who they brought in at fully on board with Mike McDonald. I truly believe in 3 years down the line, I think he's going to be what Sean McVay is to defensive coaches, and that's really high praise. But I am truly on board with him being a elite head coach. He has to prove it, but I'm there. And
Okay.
but outside of that, of course, they drafted our guy Byron Murphy from the University of Texas.
Yes, they did.
Another reason to love their offseason.
Yep.
In my opinion, the best defensive player in this draft. They got him at, I think, 13 or 14 overall. And in addition to, I think you have an immediate improvement from their defense, just from having Mike McDonald in there. And I'm not saying Pete Carroll was bad, but I just think maybe some of his schemes have kind of been played out at this point in his career. So they also added some guys on the interior of the offensive line,
Right.
but I'm blanking on their names at the moment.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think they had a great offseason. It was really good. I really loved their – this is not my list, but I loved their first two picks, actually, in the NFL draft. And I'll get to that in a minute. But I think they had a really good offseason. I didn't include the coaching changes in my list of acquisitions, but I do definitely agree with you there. Byron Murphy is easy, number one for me. Not just because he's from Texas. It's way beyond that. I think I would agree with you. He's the best defensive. He was the best overall defensive prospect in the draft. Generated almost a 13% pressure rate when lined up on the interior last year at Texas. That was second in Power 5. Just the speed, the agility, the footwork. It's really impressive from Byron Murphy. He's got a chance to be that all-pro kind of caliber defensive tackle at his ceiling in the NFL. And when you pair that with my next favorite move that they made, which was re-signing Leonard Williams, this defensive line is all of a sudden looking very scary, in my opinion. I think what you gave up to get Leonard Williams, giving up a second-round pick at last year's trade deadline or just before it, I think it made sense to resign him given what he produced. Even though the Seahawks kind of fell off at the end of last year and missed the playoffs, Leonard Williams wasn't one of those issues. And In 10 games, he had 4 sacks, 11 quarterback hits, and 32 pressures. And so to reward him with not an extreme contract, but a 3-year, $64 million deal, that's $21 million per year for a really good, productive veteran defensive tackle who gave you solid production, I think was a really good move. Now you have Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy, along with some other very solid veterans on the inside, and we know what Mike McDonald is going to try to do with those guys. He's going to try to generate more interior pressure without being heavily reliant on the blitz. But we'll get to that in a second. And then when you have to go back and forth on who your third favorite offseason acquisition is, that typically means, you had a very good offseason. I went with a more underrated signing, in my opinion. I know they added Jerome Baker at linebacker, who's been very solid past couple years for the Dolphins. I know they added guys like Laken Tomlinson and Nick Harris on the interior of their offensive line. And I know they added the offensive lineman out of UConn. Christian Haynes, I believe, is his name.
Yep, yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
In the second or third round. He almost made my list. But I went with Rayshawn Jenkins. Because remember, you lose Quandre Diggs and you lose
Jamal
Adams. It's kind of a totally remade linebacker and safety core for Seattle this year when you really think about it. But I think Rayshawn Jenkins was an underrated, cheap, low risk, not necessarily super high reward, but solid football player for cheap. 2 years, $12 million. Over the past 2 years, he's produced over 200 tackles and 5 interceptions, and he gives Mike McDonald the versatility to play free safety or strong safety. I like that move, but I liked a lot of their other moves as well. You could put Jerome Baker on this list, and I'd honestly be fine if you wanted to put the UConn offensive lineman on the
Christian
list
Haynes
as well. Anything else you want to add in terms of the offseason for Seattle?
No, I think that covers it.
X factors. How about you start us off with some X factors for Seattle?
My first X factor is, I kind of mentioned it earlier, just how much does this defense improve? Like, does it move from a below average unit to above average to good, or does it move to great? And I wouldn't predict that they're going to move to great or anything. I think they still do have a ways to go in terms of their edge group. But regardless, I do think there is that is a real needle mover in terms of what their season will be like, because they've had to operate the last 2 seasons on offense knowing that they got to put up 30 to win.
Yeah, that was my first one. It's more so. Well, first of all, let me just mention this. Relatively generally speaking, when the defense played passing attacks ranked 20th or worse last year, they were 7-1. They were very good against those lower tier passing attacks in the NFL. We're talking about the Giants, the Panthers, the Cardinals, the Commanders, the Titans, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland. Like, when they faced subpar passing attacks or subpar quarterbacks, they were very good. They won a lot of those football games. But any pass offense that ranked above number 20 last year, in those 9 games, the Seahawks went 2-7. 2 games against San Francisco, Dallas, Baltimore. That game was just ugly, 37-3. Cincinnati, even though they were playing with backup quarterbacks most of the season, the Rams, Detroit, Philadelphia. 2-7 against the upper tier, upper echelon passing offenses in the NFL. And it wasn't, I don't think, so much a personnel issue. I think the X factor here is Mike McDonald just getting more out of the talent on this defense, maximizing the talent, the personnel on this defense, which I think he's perfectly suited to do. I think he's going to improve the defensive line's performance, not just with the improved personnel, adding a guy like Byron Murphy, but increasing pressure on the quarterback without relying heavily on blitzes. I think he's going to rebuild the linebacker corps in a way that will impress fans. He's already started doing so. And I think his goal is to just kind of build a wall, solidify the defense through the middle, and help this secondary just maximize the overall talent on the defense. And I think his philosophy is tailored to do so. He tailors the strengths of his players, emphasizes the importance of confusing offenses. He'll give you those pre-snap looks. I think it's really, really good. And then my other X factor that I had prepared offensively, and look, the easy one is the tackles in this offensive line. Right now, Seattle's offensive line is the number one cheapest offensive line in the NFL based on 2024 cap hits. So they're young, but they're inexpensive. The entire offensive line needs to stay healthy this year, and they're going to need to play better. That's just a simple fact, and that includes the tackles. But my X factor actually for this offense to really go is Jackson Smith-Njigba. I actually didn't love how he was utilized last year. Now, I believe Seattle has a new offensive coordinator. It's the offensive coordinator from Washington, Ryan Grubb, which I do like. But Smith-Njigba just kind of had a weird season the way he was utilized. 35% of his targets came at or behind the line of scrimmage. Didn't love that. And when he was targeted downfield, he typically made the most of it. On targets, 10-plus yards down the field, he made a first down or a touchdown on 58% of those targets. I want to see him utilized more in an attacking way this year, if that makes sense. I didn't love the way he was utilized, but overall, next to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, he's going to be an important piece of the offense and this year. So he would be my main X factor offensively. And then it's just pretty much a new coaching staff. I mean, how much can they get out of the talent on this roster? Because it is there. The talent is there.
Yeah, and you could say that offensively and defensively. You just mentioned it. Jackson Smith-Njigba was used weirdly last year. Even DK Metcalf, you kind of question how he was used at certain points last year.
Yep.
So I think in order for Seattle's offense to get to where they want to go, I think you want to get to where Jackson Smith-Njigba is either your number two guy or more of a 1A, 1B with him and DK Metcalf. Because as good as DK Metcalf is, I don't quite consider him among the elite group of wide receivers. The Justin Jeffersons, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lambs of the world. I don't consider him within that echelon. So I think if Jackson Smith-Njigba can have a big year two jump, that'll really help this team a lot, especially with Tyler Lockett getting older.
Yes, that was the next thing I was going to add to the Smith-Njigba point is even though Tyler Lockett is like, a car that never gets rusty because of what he still can do as a number two wide receiver in this offense has been fantastic the past couple of years. He is getting up there. He turns 32 when the season starts. And eventually at some point there is probably going to be some age-related regression, maybe some injuries that factor into that. So I'd like to see Smith-Njigba utilized more as a deep threat and a downfield threat, but I also think he needs to work to become that, like to prove that he was worth whatever position he was drafted at. I can't remember exactly where he was
Right.
drafted.
Mid to late first round pick.
Yeah. Um, but I think overall for Seattle, it's about Mike McDonald. I mean, that's really the early on in this offseason, the stories of the football offseason were in a span of like 48 hours. You had the Patriots move on from Bill Belichick, Nick Saban retire, and Pete Carroll step down. Remember that week? I mean, that was
Yep.
chaos.
Yeah.
But I think Mike McDonald was the right choice at
Definitely.
head coach. Okay, so Seattle, I understand this, and people who watch this might be a little bit confused. But we just explained why, basically, based on personnel in the offseason, why we have Seattle kind of in the wide range of outcomes tier, the next tier on our list, at number 13. Some people might rank them lower. I understand that. I understand where they're coming from. But their over-under for this season is 7.5. It's a little bit lower than the teams that we have been discussing so far on our list. So what are your thoughts on the outlook for Seattle this year? Are you taking the over or are you taking the under?
Well, I'm going to slam the over, but I also
Yeah.
will add this. I think the line is also a reflection of the conference getting better and also the division getting better. The Rams made fantastic moves this offseason. We haven't talked about them yet. We'll talk about them in the coming weeks. And then the Cardinals,
Yep.
while we don't expect them to be in the playoffs or anything, they're going to be a lot more competitive.
Yeah, I would agree. I will take the over as well. 7.5 for me is too low. I think this defense will get better. Now, how much better, we'll find out, but it will get better. I love to hire a Mike McDonald. And I think just in general, maybe maybe this is more blind faith, but I do think the offensive line will play to a above average, above expectation level. Like their offensive line will be above expectation. They'll perform to that level, given that they're healthy. Because I do think the veteran additions they made on the interior, along with the tackles staying healthy and being back, will be enough. And I think Geno Smith will. I mean, even if he just stays the same from last year at 65% completion percentage, this team can win games. And I think they are going to utilize DK Metcalf in the I think Ryan Grubb, given what we saw at Washington, when he utilized those three receivers to basic perfection, Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, and goodness, I'm blanking on the other guy. Anyways, they had a group.
Yeah.
They had a group of receivers, Jeremy Bernard. The list goes on and on.
Jalen McMillan.
Yeah, Jalen McMillan. He utilized those guys to perfection. I do think that new offensive scheme will better utilize those guys. And all that to say, I think Seattle, they're probably going to end up splitting their divisional games. That's just what I would guess. They haven't been great against San Francisco the last couple of years. The Rams are going to be really good, I think. And I think Arizona's sneaky. I would guess that they probably split their division. But if they can do anything better than that, it could be pretty good for Seattle. I think they can win 9 or 10 games. Maybe even more than that if they really get maximization of the talent on the roster.
Right. I agree. I really it feels like every year we conclude draft season by raving about the Seattle Seahawks drafts, and it's time for this thing to come into fruition. It's just it hasn't really happened yet, and the clock's ticking now.
Okay, that was the first team of our second tier on our top 20 power rankings countdown, the wide range of outcomes tier, because Seattle, you can we can kind of see a wide range of outcomes for them. I could see anywhere from 7 wins to 10 wins for them, basically.
Yeah, even 11.
Even 11, maybe.
Maybe.
Okay, our final team for today, and we will be back midweek with 2 or 3 more teams to finish out this tier, is going to be the New York Jets. This is going to be a fun team to talk about, isn't it? I know
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I know you're excited for this one. So let's go. 2023. Summarize it real fast.
Well, Aaron Rodgers got hurt on the 4th play of the season, and
Yep.
Zach Wilson ended up being their quarterback, and that just their defense did what it could. Their defense was fantastic the entirety of the season, and I think the running game also underachieved as well, and that resulted in a absolute disaster of an offense. So now it's all about getting Aaron Rodgers back, and they are kind of flying under the radar because of what happened last year. And before this episode, I thought about this team. Like, I really looked at this roster, and I was just thinking, am I letting last year affect my view of this team? Like should I be higher on them? And
Yeah.
After thinking that way, I think maybe I should be. I really do think this team is in a fantastic position to be in the elite class by the time the season comes around. They just have to prove it. That's why they're down here at 11 or 12 rather.
12 is still a very good spot.
Right.
Here's what I'll
Right.
say about the Jets. They won 7 games last year. They were 3rd in the AFC East, 7-10. Their over/under win total for this year comes in at 9.5, which we'll get to wrap up this episode. But basically, for 2023 for the Jets, it was just a mixed bag of a bunch of chaos after Aaron Rodgers went down. He went down for the season before he recorded a single completion. The meme on the internet that never goes away is him running out on Monday Night Football with the American flag before that first game in the Jets uniform in New York. And that was basically the highlight of his season, unfortunately, with the torn Achilles. But he seems to have recovered very, very well and very quickly, which is great. And so it was back to what the Jets have been the past 5 years. It was a combination of Zach Wilson and Trevor Siemian, who were both worse than they were in 2022. The Jets were 32nd in pass efficiency. They were 32nd on third downs. They were 32nd in the red zone. They were a bad offense. And so, like, when you look at this team, I kind of wondered, looking back on last year, how did they win 7 games? Well, number one, their defense was very good. It kept them in a lot of games. But in the 7 games they won, they averaged 7 penalties a game. They were one of the most penalized teams in the league. They need to clean that up this year. Second most penalties, those 7 penalties per game in their wins in the NFL. They turned the ball over almost 1.5 times per game, over 1 time per game on average in their 7 wins, 4th most in the NFL. And they averaged 21.3 points per game in their wins. That was the 8th fewest amount of points in the NFL. So how the hell did they win those 7 games? Well, their defense forced takeaways. They generated extra possessions. They recorded 2.29 takeaways per game in their wins last year, 4th most. And they held opponents in those wins to less than 13 points per game. So their defense was really keeping them in games. They were generating extra possessions for their offense, giving them short fields, and they were very good on defense a year ago. And it was just kind of a combination of beating some bad quarterbacks with a really good defense, and they actually stepped up last year and beat down some playoff caliber teams and playoff caliber quarterbacks. The 7 quarterbacks they beat last year: Tommy DeVito, Sam Howell, Bailey Zappi, Russell Wilson. That's a mixed bag of and bad.
Yeah.
But they also beat playoff quarterbacks like Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and they absolutely destroyed the Texans, CJ Stroud. So when I look at this defense and what they added to it, and then obviously, when you look at or you imagine an offense with the weapons they added and the additions to the offensive line and a healthy Aaron Rodgers, you get really excited about the Jets, for sure. So, off-season additions. Go ahead and name your 3 favorites. 2 to 3
Well,
favorites.
my favorite addition this offseason was Olu Fashanu, with the I think a 10th overall pick. He he's still a very young player, is what I think people aren't talking about enough. I think he's still 22 years old. I think, like he still has a lot of room to grow as a run blocker, obviously. But where he is right now as a pass blocker is, in my opinion, gonna be where he's gonna step into the NFL and day one be a solid to good pass protector day one. And I think with how this offense is gonna be, that's the main priority when you're looking at an offensive lineman. So I think that was a fantastic addition, and the strength concerns I think will be mitigated with time as he continues to develop.
I cheated.
My section.
Go ahead.
Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. Keep going. No, keep going.
Oh, okay, yeah. Second edition, Mike Williams. We talked about the receiving core at length last year, or lack thereof. It was really Garrett Wilson and a lot of really. And Mike Williams, obviously coming off an ACL tear, is if he is 100%, is a fantastic number 2 wide receiver to have. And I do think he is going to be the number 2. I think Garrett Wilson will be the number 1. But regardless, I think the risk and reward factor is interesting to watch.
Yeah. I immediately cheated a little bit on this part of the Jets because they had a great offseason. I think generally what they did at tackle this offseason was very, very good.
Yep.
I agree with everything you said on Fashanu. I hope he plays day one, but my question is, like, they did go out, and this is part of my list. They did go out and get Tyron Smith, who's an older guy. Admittedly, he hasn't finished a full season in a while. He turns 34 in December. But he brings a wealth of experience and consistency to the left tackle position. I really like that move. And they also traded for Morgan Moses from Baltimore, who was actually very good for the Jets when he played for them back in 2021 and has been solid in Baltimore. And they get him for relatively cheap this year, a $5.5 million cap hit for a very solid tackle. 2 veterans ahead of a rookie. I just want to know, like, what's going to be the combination in week 1. If it's the 2 veterans, great. Or are they going to throw in the rookie right away? But either way, what they did at tackle, I think, was very, very good.
Yeah, I think maybe I should have just lumped everything they did at tackle together because as you mentioned, fantastic moves. I think day one it'll be the 2 veterans. I think that's probably the way to go. And then if an injury does happen, and being a Cowboys fan, injury will happen. As much as I love Tyron Smith, injury will happen. You'll just have to hope that it's not too severe. And then at that point, you'll have Fashanu in there, and for a swing tackle, There's way worse you can have.
Oh yeah. My next two on my list were the receivers they added. And I wanted to actually start with Malachi Corley. Again, this is in no particular order. Who was a receiver they drafted in the third round of this year's draft out of Western Kentucky, who I think is going to be an upgrade in the slot over what they've had in past years. I just look, he needs to become a more consistent pass catcher. And there's always a question of like how much is Aaron Rodgers going to trust these rookie receivers? Because that's been a question in past years with Aaron Rodgers. But once you get the ball in this guy's hands, he's dynamite. I really like that fit in the slot for them. I think when you surround him with Garrett Wilson, what he's been so far in the NFL is nothing short of just incredible. A late Travis kid, so we're going to be rooting for him.
Yep.
But I think getting Mike Williams, who the question with him is availability, but when he's been on the field, the Chargers offense was much more effective with Mike Williams on the field the last couple of years than it was when he was not on the field. They were hurt. Their passing offense was hurt in terms of EPA efficiency when Mike Williams missed games. That's the only question with him. But I like going out and getting him for a year for $14 or $15 million. Absolutely. So I like the additions to the wide receiver room. My caveat here is I wanted to put Hassan Reddick on this list. The reason I don't, though, is because we don't know if he's going to be playing. He's got a contract dispute right now. My understanding is that it could go into the season. And so it kind of be silly of me to, even though I like the addition, he's a guy who, can replace most of what Bryce Huff gave them, who was the Jets' best pass rusher last year. But they get him from the Eagles for a conditional third-round pick. I think it's actually a steal. Like, he's a very good player. He's averaged 12 and a half sacks over the last 4 years. But is he going to be on the football field is the question. I just felt silly putting him on the list given his contract situation right now. So I went with the two receivers. But Hassan Reddick's another exciting addition to an already very good defense.
One other thing I wanted to mention in terms of their offseason is they brought in a offensive consultant to help out Nathaniel Hackett with the play calling. I had the name written down, and I don't have it in my head anymore, but take my word for it. They brought in a consultant, and to me, that I think it's a good thing, just because we still have our questions about whether Nathaniel Hackett is actually a good coach. Me personally, I definitely do question that, because we know what Matt LaFleur is, and we know he was doing most of that stuff on the offense. Nathaniel Hackett left, and the offense went without a hitch last year in Green Bay. So I do question what Nathaniel Hackett is, and I think ultimately we're gonna the bringing in that consultant will give some insurance in that regard.
Absolutely. I don't know specifically who you're talking about. I'm going to try to look it up and find it by the end of the show, but we will see. So is that all for the offseason? Let's do X factors now for the Jets. Name a couple X factors in your mind for this New York team.
My X factor is where is the play calling at in terms of like getting the most out of the run game, being like as efficient as possible as an offense, and that's kind of where my offensive consultant conversation leads into, and I think is this offense going to be able to be an elite run game with Brees Hall going into his third season now? I think that's a fair question to have, and I think they are very capable of being that. It's really come together here.
Yeah, for me, I mean, the Jets are a very good roster. Um,
Yeah.
it's basically comes down to play calling. Nathaniel Hackett is number one for me. What does this offense look like? How much does he mesh with Aaron Rodgers? Aaron Rodgers being healthy is number two. That's very simple. Hopefully he is. And then, I mean, really outside of that, I don't really see much else. I mean,
Yeah,
everyone just seems to be who they are.
I
Do
would
you have
mention, I
anything?
would mention Robert Saleh maybe, just in terms of
Okay.
all the penalties they had last season.
Yeah.
Can they clean that up? I think that's going to be a big part as well, because if they're going to go out and compete for a Super Bowl, especially in the AFC, you can't give a team like the Chiefs free 15 yards or free 10 yards or free 5 yards, because they're already hard enough to beat.
Couple things I would add. I think the Jets have a excellent opportunity in the first 5 weeks of the season. Weeks 1 through 5, their schedule's rated the easiest in football.
Wow.
Um, Now, they open up with San Francisco, so that's obviously not easy. And that's going to be a great Monday Night Football game to open the season. That's not easy, obviously. But outside of that game, they play, supposedly, we're projecting here, they play their defense gets to go up against 3 rookie quarterbacks in the first 5 weeks of the season. Week 3 at home against Drake May and the Patriots. Week 4 at home against what I think will be Bo Nix. I'm not completely sure about that, but I think it's going to be Bo Nix, hopefully. And then week 5, maybe it's Sam Darnold, but for the sakes of my argument, let's just go JJ McCarthy. But either way, like those teams aren't in great situations at quarterback. Those quarterbacks do not, at least yet, scare you with this defense. I think it's a good opportunity. Those are all winnable games to get off to a really good start this year. And then you get Tennessee mixed in there. And, they're not a team that I don't think the Jets can't beat. So I think that those first 5 games are going to be very crucial for the Jets. Getting off to a really good start would help the Jets significantly. And then, as you guys already know, probably, but the Jets are going to be on prime time a lot this year. um, Week 6 against the Bills in Monday Night Football. Week 7 at Pittsburgh on Sunday Night Football. Week 9 against the Texans on Thursday Night Football. Week 11 against the Colts on Sunday Night Football. The Jets are the first team in NFL history to receive 6 primetime games in the first 11 weeks of a football season. So
Jeez.
they're going to be on prime time a ton. So get ready. It's going to be fun.
Gosh, I really hope Aaron Rodgers is healthy.
I
Oh
do
my
too.
god.
Knock on wood. Knock on wood.
Fuck.
I think one thing I will add is I do think, with some of the health concerns that you might have with a Brees Hall, who I think is coming off an injury, or he bounced back nicely last year coming off a 2022 knee injury. We know he's a big back with that unique speed. I really like Brees Hall, but I did like one of the additions they made through the draft later on. I think it was a day 3 pick in Braylon Allen out of Wisconsin, I believe.
Yeah. Yep.
Now they did pick Isaiah Davis as well. They're kind of redundant backs in my opinion, but I think both are downhill runners with athletic traits to have a pretty good ceiling. I like the depth that they added at running back. Is one thing I'll add to that, because I do think the running game is another kind of X factor. When you have a quarterback up there in age, you obviously want to be able to run the football. And that's going to play into their success later on in the season, given They're going to be playing in colder weather. You know the whole deal with that. So, yeah, I think that's about it for the Jets. Now we can kind of wrap up the show with our projections if you don't have anything else you want to add. Are you good?
Yeah, I'm all good on that.
So 9.5 over/under win total for the Jets in 2024, based on their offseason. I don't know how much you know about their schedule, but I kind of just gave you a glimpse into it. Based on what you imagine for the Jets in 2024, where are you picking them to finish? Emmy? Hello? Are you there?
Okay, there we go.
Oh, there you are. Okay,
What?
so
Okay. Yeah. So I would slam the over. This is one that I would definitely put my money on if I could, but I live in Texas, so can't do that. But yeah, this is an easy one, man. I really do believe that this team, barring another injury, which I really don't think that would happen 2 years in a row. Please don't let that happen. But this team is just too good to not win at least 10 games. Like, I think that's their floor.
I agree, actually. I see a lot of winnable games on their schedule. As long as they don't slip up, and it's the NFL, so it's any given Sunday.
Yeah.
But I see minimum 3 wins, but probably 4 wins against their division. I think they beat New England twice, and I think they probably I think they split their games against Buffalo and Miami. I think that's a reasonable expectation if Aaron Rodgers is healthy. And then I think as long as you beat the teams you're supposed to, if you can beat Denver if at home, if you can beat Minnesota, if you can beat Tennessee, if you can beat Arizona, um, beat the teams you're supposed to, you're already to like 7 or 8 wins. And then beyond that, it's just about kind of doing solid against the Houstons of the world and the Miami's or the Rams, these other playoff caliber teams that we're going to be talking about in the coming weeks. I think 10 or 11 wins is where I sit with the Jets. Realistically, like I think 10 wins is probably about the floor. Maybe 9 wins is the absolute floor. If things don't go right out of the gates, I could see it being a 9-8 kind of season. But I think 10 wins realistically is where it should be. And it could go higher than that. I see them in the 10 or 11 range. I hesitate to, flat out go 12 or 13. That's hard in the NFL.
Yeah.
And I just think their division is still very, very good. And they do play other teams like Houston and Indianapolis, who could be dangerous. Seattle, Jacksonville, the Rams. Schedule's not San Francisco. The schedule's not easy, but there are winnable games, enough of them to get to that 10-11 win mark and be in the playoffs, which is why we have them at number 12. So
Yep.
I think we generally agree there. Anything else you want to add on what's happened this weekend? Anything going on in your personal life or any of these 3 teams before we wrap this thing up?
Well, I'll say this. I drove down here to Dallas this weekend for a golf tournament. That was the original plan. But I get here and then they they told me that I was ineligible to play because this tournament was for golfers from North Texas section.
Interesting.
Um so so I was kind of angry about that, but um you know, it it is what it is. I've made do with that, but I just found it so strange.
Yeah, here's what I'll say. A couple things. Number one, Just in general, like my excitement's through the roof right now. I mean, really is. I know yours is too. Um, the first college football games happen 2 weeks from today, week 0 of college football. So it's football. I mean, they're not great games, but it's football. We already have preseason going on. We're getting a look at some of these, even though the outcomes don't matter. We're getting some things to talk about, at least in terms of these rookie quarterbacks, new quarterback situations. And overall, just like having the work week with something to look forward to during on the weekends, like having all of Saturday college football, having Thursday night football, and then having fantasy, our picks episodes. Like it's just going to be our recap episodes are going to be back. Dithole's going to be amazing. I'm just excited for the podcast, honestly. And I'm excited to jump into the next 11 teams we have on this list. And you know what team is going to begin our next episode?
The Cowboys.
Cowboys.
Ooh. Oh,
so
boy.
what I'm going to ask you is, I think this episode went really well. And the first 6 minutes were spent talking about basketball. And we still got 3 teams in and covered a ton in an hour, 15 minutes. So for our next episode, do you want to just go ahead and do the next 3 teams, finish out this tier with the Cowboys, Bills, and Packers? Or do you want to just do Cowboys and Bills?
Ooh. Let's just do Cowboys and Bills, and then, or actually, no. Let's finish out the tier. Yeah, I think Cowboys, Bills, Packers. I think that's a good, solid episode.
Yeah, as was this one.
That'll be fun. That'll be really
It'll
fun.
be really fun. I haven't talked to you about your schedule for the week, but what I can tell you guys is expect Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports tomorrow. Tomorrow night is my understanding for that. And then expect a NFL episode, that Cowboys, Bills, Packers episode that we just mentioned, middle of the week. Don't know exactly when yet. And then one more dit hole mixed in as well. We still have a lot of college football to get into. So the SEC, we're jumping straight in head first into the SEC this week, starting tomorrow. So that'll be fun. Anything else that you want to mention before we get out of here?
Ooh, I'm about to walk into Buc-ee's. I just stopped for gas, and I am about to grab as much fudge as my hands can grab.
I don't blame you. All right, so it's a perfect time to wrap this thing up. Emmy, thanks for your time on your drive. That was fantastic. Your audio sounded great, by the way.
Oh, really? That's good.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. We made the most out of the situation. This was a good time to record on a Saturday night. Now I get to go get my dinner, whatever that's going to be. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday night. I'm going to go check in on how Xavier Worthy did in his first preseason action.
Oh, right.
And we'll see you guys tomorrow for a loaded episode, including post first practice scrimmage intel for the Longhorns. What happened in their first scrimmage today? We'll get into that tomorrow, along with more Longhorn talk and some SEC talk as well. And then we'll be chugging along in our pre-football season mode here on the Raw Prospect Podcast. So for Emmy Nixon, walking into Buc-ee's, and for Michael Ween, who's going to get dinner, we are the Raw Prospect Podcast. Enjoy your night. Peace out.
Peace.